Hello, everybody. My name is Evert Hopman. I live in Western Massachusetts in an oak forest. I've been blessed to be here for 40 years now. I think I'm turning into an oak tree. But anyway, I'm very happy to be here. And once again, I'm going to be talking about magical and folklore aspects of nettle. I'm not going to be talking about the medicinal part because I know other people will be dealing with that aspect. And I just wanted to mention, just before we start, I am an author. You can go to my website, elleneverthopman.com. You can see my books. They're also available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Simon and Schuster. You can find my stuff. But since it's May, um, this book, The Sacred Herbs of Spring, is probably very relevant right now, although I have a bunch of other herbals, but this one is the most spring oriented with lots of recipes and beautiful full color illustrations throughout. And then I have a new children's book, which I just quickly wanted to mention. For those of you who have covens and groves and do seasonal celebrations, um, this will give you a lot of ideas because it's stories to read out loud, and each story has recipes and a craft to go with it. For example, this is a spring story which features, it's called Freya's Cats, and it's about the cats associated with Freya and a story about a little girl. This one is Pomona, the goddess of the harvest in the Roman tradition, and she's also the goddess of apples. So it's beautifully illustrated, um, and you can find it on my website. You can also find it on Amazon, both electronically and in paper. Okay, so back to the nettles. If you think of one word to describe nettles, the word would be protection. And in other talks that I've done here, I've talked about magical herbalism. And one of the ways that you identify a protective herb is, does it have thorns and does it sting? Things that have thorns and things that sting are protective. And you can make a wreath out of it. You can hang it on the door, on the gatepost, whatever you need to do to ward off nasty things. So that's nettles in a thumbnail sketch, but now I'm going to dive a little deeper into nettles. So the word nettle possibly comes from the Anglo-Saxon nadel or nadel, meaning needle, or it may also come from Proto-Indo-European ned, meaning to bind or tie. And of course, nettles in ancient times were used to make netting, cordage, fishing nets, cloth, um, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But 20,000-year-old tombs, or excuse me, 2,000-year-old tombs have been found where the nettle cloth was still intact. So it's a very, very durable cloth made out of the stems of the nettle. In Tibetan Buddhism, the 12th century Saint Milarepa ate only nettles for years. So he had nettles and water. That was it. While he lived in a cave, that made his skin turn green eventually. And if you look at pictures of Milarepa, you'll see him with green skin. In China, nettle cloth was used to wrap the dead. And that was exclusively used to wrap the dead in ancient times, which is, it hints at its protective qualities. So it's going to protect the dead from evil spirits. In Norse tradition, nettles are sacred to Thor, and they protect you from lightning. And nettles are also herbs of Loki, the trickster. Um, and Loki had a fishing net that was made from nettles. Um, a, Nettles in Norse and Saxon tradition are a plant of one of the nine worlds, and that world is called Muspelheim, and it's a place of fire, of lava, of flame, and it's called the realm of fire. The sun, moon, and stars were all born out of Muspelheim, and because of this connection, throwing fresh nettles onto the hearth fire was said to ward off evil, bad luck, and danger. And rolled up dried nettles were thrown onto the fire to send curses and back to the sender. If you think you're being cursed, you send it back to the sender. And it's interesting that nettles are an herb of Mars, of course, and all herbs of Mars are very hot. So this fiery, hot nature is kind of universal. In Irish tradition, nettles were said to be a shelter for elves and also a protection against sorcery. It was said that a thick stand of nettles meant that fairies lived close by, but nettles would also protect you against black magic and fairy mischief. In Cork, County Cork, in the south of Ireland, Nettlemas was another name for May Day, and May Eve was called Nettlemas Night. And boys would roam the streets with bunches of nettles and use them to sting friends and strangers, and girls would sting their lovers. In Irish tradition, it's said that if you eat 3 meals containing nettles in May, you will not be sick for the rest of the year. And that tradition still continues, by the way. And after May, the nettles are not considered fit to eat because the devil uses them to make his shirt. But I think that's just a reference to the fact that if you're going to eat nettles, the best time to get them is when they're small. You don't want to gather old nettles. They're going to be very tough. They're not going to taste very good. You can snip off the very top, possibly, but that's about it. In Welsh folklore, putting nettle under the pillow of a sick person and then seeing if it stays green overnight will reveal whether the person will live or die. And in Denmark, Hans Christian Andersen recorded a folk tale of the brothers who were turned into birds. And there's different versions of the tale where 3, 6, 7, 11, or 12 brothers, depending on the story, are turned into swans, ravens, geese, storks, ducks, or peacocks. And then their sister is supposed to remove the spell. And to do that, she has to make them shirts made of nettles, thistledown, or starflower. And of course, nettles and thistles are extremely painful to work with. The sister had to gather them in complete silence in a graveyard at midnight, and she had to be completely silent as she wove the cloth. And the people in the village, of course, thought this looked really suspicious. How come she's not talking? And they decided to burn her as a witch, and they were just about to burn her when she managed to throw a shirt over each of her brothers, and that broke the spell. But one brother was only half covered, so he ended up with one wing and one arm. This story is basically telling about how spinning, weaving, and sewing are heroic activities. They involve discipline and a lot of work, um, and are a labor of love. And nettlecloth from the Bronze Age has been found in Denmark, going all the way back to the Bronze Age. So Danish folklore says that nettles will only grow where the blood of innocence has been shed. So um, in Scotland, it is said that nettles grow from the bodies of the dead. And in Scottish tradition, nettles had to be gathered in silence at midnight, and no one could speak to the nettle gatherer. And this way, the plants would retain their healing power. In English areas, in some English areas, May 29th is called Oak and Nettle Day. It commemorates Charles II's escape by hiding inside an oak tree. People put oak on their caps and in their buttonholes and ask every person they meet to show their oak. If they're not wearing oak, they get beaten with nettles on their face, neck, and hands. Um, in England, nettles are said to increase courage and protect the home from lightning. Children would flog themselves with nettles on May 3rd as a way to stimulate circulation and to relieve cold limbs. And I think this goes back to the Romans. Anyway, I'll get to that in a minute. But to cure a fever, the plant was pulled up by the roots while saying the patient's name and the patient's parents' name. And that's to alert the spirits, I think. Nettles found growing in the shade were said to be the best for a fever. Nettles thrown on the fire during a storm were said to ward off lightning. So you can see there's a lot of Indo-European similarities going on here. The Roman nettle is the one with the harshest sting in England, and it's believed that the Romans brought the seeds with them specifically so they could rub their arms and legs with the leaves to increase blood flow and enable them to withstand the cold because, for the poor Romans, the English and Scottish climate was miserable. They also said that a man's virility was improved by whipping nettles below the kidneys. And that means the rear end or the front. And also in England, nettles and yarrow were worn as a charm to end fear and drive away evil spirits. In German folklore, Germanic lore, again, nettles are sacred to Thor. In Austria and some parts of Italy, nettles were tossed into the fire to repel danger and lightning. For the ancient Germans, or the Germanic people, Thor was the patron deity of marriage, and nettle seeds were said to increase passion and fertility. In Slavic areas such as Russia, Belarus, and Serbia, the god of spring is Jarilo. A young man dressed in white robes carrying a sheaf of wheat would ride on a horse as people sang about Jarilo's return from a faraway land. In Croatia and Slovenia, similar celebrations were held to welcome the return of green Jurig. In Serbia and Bosnia, parties were held in forests and fields where there was ritual bathing in rivers and lakes, jumping over fire, and decorating the body with willow and nettles. In Poland, bundles of nettles were hung above the entranceway to ward off demons. Bundles of nettles were placed in and around crop fields to drive away any spirits that could hurt the fields. In Native American tribes of California, nettles were used as part of witchcraft training. Among the Kawaiisu, children were required to walk through a patch of nettles, and nettles were whipped on their back to increase stamina to face hard times and to test their spirit. The Kawaiisu also associated nettles with medicine dreams. They would walk barefoot through a field of nettles to prepare themselves to enter the dream world. Several Nevada tribes burn nettle leaves in the sweat lodge ceremony. Nettles are associated with coyote, meaning they are a trickster plant. There's a Cree legend that says that nettles were once golden, but humans did not respect the plant or give it tobacco. They just walked by it and took it for granted. So the plant turned green so that it would disguise itself and blend in with other herbs and then sting humans by surprise. And this taught humans to respect the plant because they had to keep their eye out for it. In the Pacific Northwest, again, this is Native American tradition, men would rub nettles on their body to prepare for fishing, whaling, and seal hunting expeditions. Nettles were said to give strength and protection against cold weather and also to change human smell. Um, in medieval times, and this is back in Europe, nettles were strewn on the floor to protect everyone inside from evil. So you get this theme, this constant theme of protection. Bundles of nettles were hung on the door, in windows, or from the eaves to protect the home from evil spirits and forces. Okay, so that's the general folklore idea. Now I'm going to move a little bit into the magic. So, nettles are an herb of Mars. And as I mentioned, herbs that have thorns or prickles are assigned to Mars because Mars is a warrior and these are warrior plants. Certain metals and stones can enhance Mars energy. For example, iron, steel, rubies, red coral, and cinnabar. And you can add these to a spell jar or other magical workings. So to make a spell jar, suppose you really needed protection from something. I have no idea what. So you get yourself a jar, like a mason jar, put some nettles in there, fresh or dried, and then add to enhance the energy, iron, steel, rubies, red coral, or cinnabar, any of those. Put that in there with the nettles. If you want to jumpstart the project, you could sprinkle a little ginger. That would heat things up even more. You put the lid on the jar and then you get a candle. And for this, well, depends what you're trying to do. Okay, so you get a candle, probably green or red, I would think, depending on how mad you are. You might put a black candle if you're really mad. Anyway, you affix the candle. You light the candle, drip some wax on the lid of the jar, stick it on the jar, and you can chant your intention or pray over it or whatever. That's called the spell jar. And what it does is I believe what it's doing is it's enhancing your own ability on the quantum level to affect change, to make things happen. So, um, Mars plants and stones reach into the animal instincts, such as self-preservation and passions. Mars energy strengthens self-reliance, independence, will, and action. Okay. Nettles are also used in dream lore. If you dream of being stung by nettles, it means you're angry about something. To dream of harvesting nettles means that somebody is thinking well of you. And if married, it implies domestic peace and happiness. So you're kind of working profitably or successfully with the thorny issue, whatever it is. Um, Nettles are also a forest protector. Nettles grow in liminal areas between the field and the forest. So they need some sunlight. They don't grow in the open field. They don't grow in the forest. They like to grow between the field and the forest. They prefer boundary spaces and the edge of a path. So it's a liminal gatekeeper plant. It also has an affinity for graveyards and places where the dead have been buried. And that's where the living and the dead intersect. So it's a liminal space between this world and the other world. And nettles like that. Um, you can wear nettles in a charm bag, probably a little cloth bag under your clothing, for luck, protection, healing of disease, and also to enhance fertility. And speaking of fertility, I was told this by a medicine person, and I assume it's true. But an old Native American cure for infertility in men, if a man wasn't able to be, you know, successful, shall we say, with his organs, an old woman would wait in a dark teepee with a bunch of nettles. The man would go in, and in the dark, she would strike his private parts, and that would bring blood to the area. Of course, it would engorge the penis, and then his infertility or his lack of circulation would be cured, at least temporarily. Um, in Hoodoo tradition, nettles are used to undo curses and jinxes. So you make, in the Hoodoo tradition, you would make a tea and a bath, 1/2 nettles and 1/2 mint. The mint stops your self-defeating thoughts and makes the nettle taste better. So you steep it for about 10 minutes. Drink half of it as tea, add the rest to the bath, and also put some salt and Epsom salts in there and soak in it. Um, Nettles are an herb of purification. So nettle baths, smudging yourself with nettles, stinging yourself with nettles is cleansing and purifying. Um, Nettles are used in spells and rituals to protect, banish, or heal. And they are of the fire element, so they're used to increase passion, strength, and courage. Nettles are also used as a divinatory herb. And if you are doing divination, for example, with tarot or ogham or runes or bones, whatever you're using, you toss nettles into the air. Um, you can smudge yourself with them, you can drink the tea, or you can just study the pattern that they make when they hit the ground. Some people can do that. It's kind of like tea leaf reading. Um, as I mentioned before, in European folklore, it is said that nettles protect against fairy mischief. Nettles can be planted around the house or worn as a protective charm to ward off malign supernatural influences. And nettles are used in love spells because they're hot, right? They will heat up romance. So again, you could make a spell jar for a love spell. You get a mason jar, put some nettles in there. I would put a little cinnamon, little ginger, maybe some rose petals, right, for sweetness, because you don't want it to be all hot. Or maybe you do. And then put on the lid, put a pink candle if you want sweet love, put a red candle if you're really trying to create passion. And nettles were also fed to cows, and it's very nutritious for cows. But feeding nettles to the cows was also to stop witches and trolls from hexing the cows. And nettles are very nutritious for chickens, pigs, and cows. So they'll stay healthy and they won't be hurt by hexes. Okay, so that's the magical part. So the only thing I have left here is the 9 herbs charm, and I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the 9 herbs charm. Um, and it's a spell that was recorded in a single manuscript, commonly known as the Lacnunga, or that's Old English for remedies, which the British Museum dates to the 9th or early 10th century. The charm touches upon animism, emphasis on the number 9, multiples of 3. 9 is all about death and transformation, right? Because the next number is 1, so the cycle starts over again. So when something talks about 9, a journey of 9 leagues or the whole 9 yards, which refers to a great kilt, it tells you that it's a lot, a big deal, beyond the 9th wave. So the number 9, you should always pay attention because it means it's something, a big deal. Okay. And The spell also invokes the Germanic deity Odin, or Old English Woden. Um, so the number 9, the number 3 are found in Germanic and Celtic cultures, being especially important, as I said, triple deities. You know, the high gods are triple, like Bridget, for example, is a triple goddess. Um, Land, sea, and sky, those are the 3 worlds. The 9 months that a fetus spends in the womb, which could be the origin of all this, because after the 9 months, the new birth happens, right? Then you start the cycle. That's just some of the associations. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's several pages long, but I'll just read the part pertaining to nettle. Now, this plant is called stone, she who grows on stone. She defeats venom. She grinds away pain. She is called stithe, she who withstands venom. She chases away malice, casts out pain. So why the references to venom? Because they thought that disease was brought by a worm or a serpent. Okay, so the venom is repelled. This is the plant that fought against the worm. She is mighty against venom. She is mighty against air illness. And I'm sure you all remember from COVID, air illness when it's transmitted by air. She is mighty against the horror who travels over the land. You, venom loath, go now. The less from the great from the less, until for both he receives a remedy. Okay, so the way you would work, it's called the 9 herbs charm because there's 9 herbs in there. And when you see it called the 9 herbs charm, that's telling you it's the big deal herb charm. The other ingredients are mugwort, plantain, lamb's crest, nettles, also called venom loath, chamomile, sour apple of the wood, philia, and fennel. Um, And what you would do is you would dry and powder the herbs, make them into dust, mush up some apples, fresh apples, mix in the herb dust with the apples, make a paste, and add some ashes. And I'm sure this has chemistry to it because ashes are, you use that to make soap. But take fennel, and mix the plant into the boiling paste. Bathe the wound with an egg mixture first, then apply the salve, and also apply egg paste afterwards. Sing the galder, galder means magical incantation, over each of the 9 plants as you work with them. Sing the galder 3 times before you apply the salve. Sing the galder 3 times on the apple. Sing the galder into the patient's mouth. Sing the galder into each of the patient's ears. And before before the salve is applied to the patient, sing the galder into the patient's wound. So this is really shamanic healing. Um, you're singing along with the herbs. Okay, so that's really all I'm going to say about that. You can easily find the 9 herbs charm online. Um, and there's, of course, whole books written about it. So anyway, it's been a pleasure. And you can find me at elleneverthopman.com if you want to write to me or see my books for some reason. And I am a Druid. I've been a Druid for 40 years. If you're interested in studying Druidism, go to tribeoftheoak.org. tribeoftheoak.org. Thank you.